Good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock sharp. So we will continue with our yearly meeting number 21, UCS and CS Global. This is the day devoted to global economy. It has been very interesting to see the vision of the Oracle, China from inside and outside. And now we will connect with the rest of the world. It's very important for us. We already talked about how China could take that hegemonic role in the world. Now we are going to talk in full about the conflict between the United States and China. And even when they say that they don't want to continue being the king of the world, they are still, at least until now. But there it is, this conflict with China. And in this meeting devoted to Latin America, what are the effects over Latin America? Each region in Latin America is going to be impacted. How there are some regions where the power is still dominating, and in some others China is taking over. So it is practically a matter of North and South. That very interesting topic is going to be presented by someone that helped me to make this agenda, also from the Colegio de Mexico. And that's why this topic resulted, those that you have been hearing and you will continue to hear. So I'm going to give the floor to our presenter, Judith Herrera, so she can introduce our speaker, which is the hegemonic conflict between the United States and China. Thank you very much. Well, we do have here the bio of Dr. Gustavo Cánovas, Secretary of Colegio de Mexico, professor, and also researcher in Colegio de Mexico, member of the National Research Institute. He was appointed by the government member of Chapter 10 on trade remedies for the Free Trade Agreement of North America. A lawyer from UNAM, a PhD degree from Yale University. His main areas of interest is international economics and the integration process in Latin America. His two most recent books, Mexico and the United States, Free Trade Agreements in North America, Prospects and Methods, published by Colegio de Mexico in 2010 and 14. He's also co-editor of Restructuring Life in North America by Free Trade Agreement by the NAFTA. Also, PMEC, SMEs, published in 2019, co-author and editor of 21 additional books on international matters. He has published countless articles, associated director on the Center for Studies from Duke University and director of the School of Latin American Studies at Yale University. He has also been a conference speaker in several universities in the United States, Belfast, Yale in the United States. He has received countless awards and scholarship from the Woodrow Wilson Center, MacArthur, the Inter-American Foundation, and Yale University. So we give the floor to Dr. Gustavo Vega from the Colegio de Mexico. His topic is entitled The Hegemonic Conflict Between the United States and China, Implications for Latin America. Welcome. Thank you very much for your introduction. It is my pleasure to be sharing with you this forum with Marisela as my colleague. It is a shame that this is not in person, but we need to accept the new reality. What I wanted to do in this occasion, hold on a second. Let me return the presentation, please. What I wanted to do was to get in details about something which Marisela Connolly presented at the end of her speech, a conflict that has been generated between the United States and China. Could you please put your presentation? My apologies. There it is. As I said, I wanted to get into details on how to explain the conflict that has been generated between the United States and China, characteristics, dimensions, the position of both countries. In this respect, negotiations that have been carried out, results. It is also important to see which are the characteristics to understand the conflict. I think that what you're looking at now is nothing new. This is a fundamental feature of the relationship between United States and China. Fundamentally, since the end of the Second World War. And as I said, in this first slide, a brief history capsule to understand the current situation. The first important period is from 1949 to 1970. Both countries had a period of big confrontation, political enemies during the Cold War. As we know, when the Second World War finished, United States proposed a new international order based on market opening. They created the Bretton Woods, and with the purpose of not having wars, the only way to resolve this would be with a system that all of us get benefited from. This idea, which is accepted by many countries in Europe, is not accepted by the Soviet Union, that rises as an alternate power confronted to the United States with a different vision on economics and politics as a whole. They do not agree with the U.S. system and decided to have their own, and the Cold War was born. In 1949, as Dr. Connolly mentioned, there was an internal war in China because it was invited by Japan in the Second World War, then a civil war. The Nationalist Communist Party in China was involved. So when China decides to have an agreement of cooperation with the Soviet Union, that was considered as a threat. Especially, this confrontation is accelerated when China decides to participate in Korea's war, deciding to support North Korea. US and the United Nations are trying to resolve this internal conflict, and they confronted China, and they see China as a clear enemy to overcome. They established this policy by creating a barrier, a military barrier. They established an alliance with Japan, Korea, and then they also left their fleet in Taiwan Strait to prevent China from invading Taiwan. As Dr. Connolly said, the nationalist government was presided. The United States accepts the idea that China cannot recover. That's why they decided to support it. And they also support Japan. As you know, they had previous agreements. Also with the Philippines, they would have expected that China had a similar attitude like that of Yugoslavia. And this leads to a big conflict that is experienced in this period, which is interrupted in 1971 with the visit of President Nixon to China, resulting because in that moment the United States and China are undergoing a complex internal period. In the case of China, the failure of the Cultural Revolution, poverty was present, and there's also a confrontation with the Soviet Union. In fact, there's an armed conflict, and it seems likely a confrontation between the two powers. So the worst enemy of China sees this as an option to stop the conflict. United States decides that back then they are confronted with Vietnam. They had the intervention, and as a result of this idea that started in 1949 with the victory of the China Revolution, to prevent to have another communist government in the region. So they participate because they see that this is supported by the Soviet Union. As you know, this failed. Even when the United States is overthrown and they see China with the possibility of getting closer, and also the United States to get closer, China and the United States consider that the Soviet Union is interested in advance in Afghanistan, Central Asia, and they cannot allow that. So they reach this agreement. A period starts that has the formal recognition of diplomatic relationships. In that period, even when they get closer, for example, United States does not accept, and China demands to stop recognizing Taiwan. United States doesn't accept. So, in the General Assembly of the United Nations, they say that continental China is the true representative of China. So they expel Taiwan and they recognize China as a representative of the Chinese people. United States doesn't accept, but in 1979 they started the reforms, the opening reform. United States sees the opportunity to get closer to China, not only at political level with strategic stance, but as a possibility before the size of the country as a potential market. They see the possibility of attracting it to the Western world and invite them to this financial, commercial, and trading system with a new opening model. And as Dr. Connolly said, Deng Xiaoping and Chinese leaders see that the only solution to the internal crisis of China is opening and promotion to integrate in the international economy, globalization of markets, including also the World Trade Organization. And this is a period which is called pragmatic interdependence. China participates. They see that this is the opportunity to overcome the crisis. United States also sees the opportunity to make it a country of liberal economy, and with the idea that economic liberalism, according to this vision, produces a democratic system. So they think that it is convenient to get closer and also attracted far from the Soviet Union that could lead to overcome the Soviet Union. So yes, China participates, and somehow they started to have this growth, as Dr. Connolly said. They start to be very successful in different markets, and from here on, there's still an opening. United States offers assistance. The university prepares lawyers, experts in law that could also be part of Chinese universities, so they can understand the operation of the international world and they can integrate in an easier manner. So there's an attempt of interdependence, but they start to see some Chinese resistance to accept all the rules that they are proposing. And for example, the acceptance process to the World Trade Organization is from 1986 to 2001. China resists to make changes to some policies, and even nowadays this is still part of the issues. In 2007 and 2008, even when there's a bridge, 2008, it's a very important year that explains this distancing process and rivalry between the two countries. This is related to the Great Recession of 2008 and 9, that international crisis. China is perceived as a symbol of decadence, lack of credibility by the United States. They decide that they cannot accept a model creating great inequality in the society, and they have something different to offer. This model takes into consideration a fundamental guide like a social process. The Western idea of acknowledging human rights and internal balance and social cohesion. Internal fights have to be prevented. That's the great concern in China. They said, we cannot accept the Western model, but we have our own. So these ideas start to grow, that China has to establish its own institutions, as it was previously mentioned, as an alternative to Western institutions. They start proposing some policies to generate internal growth based on social cohesion, even when they do not comply with the requirements of Western countries. That's the Western democracy requirements. So they establish some policies. Dr. Connolly didn't mention the program Made in China, and I will talk about that later on. So, from this period, the United States started to criticize those policies of these new Chinese programs that are discriminating and are unloyal to companies in the trade arena. For example, United States, remember that was during the Obama administration, they cannot allow China to have the whole program. They are far from Asia, so they need to reposition and establish alternatives like the TPP, Trans-Pacific Treaty. This agreement was negotiated with 11 countries in the region to have an alternative to the model that was promoted in the region. So, it is not necessarily Trump. Since Obama, there is a policy. They cannot allow this confrontation, and they have a series of policies that they are not willing to accept. With Trump's administration, this perception is accelerated that there's a discrimination by China in some fronts. In a few words, in summary, the conflict has been the constant in the U.S.-China relationships. It is fully related to the vision on how to conduct economy and political relationship among the different groups of the society. Not only the society, but also in the rest of the world. This model should prevail individual rights, freedom, and this political party controlling from the center is against that, and social pressure should be the reason. So, I am trying to summarize how in the Western world it is conceived, and also in Europe, this idea of the China model. So, what happens? What is the explanation for this conflict? At the bottom, it is explained that there is a change in the economic balance, like an earthquake. And the balance was transformed from the Western to China in the last 30 years. Never before international economy experienced a so serious and deep change in a so brief period as with China, with its model and economic success in the last 30 years. So, Recapping. In 1990, the World Bank GDP in the United States was 5.3. For this year, China is considered the first global economy with a GDP which is superior. United States is having only 20,544. Projections calculate that for 2050, China GDP will be half. The United States will be the half of China. Now, exports of goods and services, China overcame US when they have 10.7% of exports. And as we see these elements, the improvement of human capital, they can see that in China it is integrating. They are those that are studying engineering, technology, and those students that are creating the manufacturing goods. Now, in investment and development, they overcame United States since 2014-15. In 2018, China overcame in scientific research, and they have more patents recorded than any other country. They say that patents are not so good, but regardless of this fact, it is a fact that they are recording more patents, and they are producing 30,000 doctors in science. 15 years ago, foreign companies had 200 research centers, and currently they have like 1,800. 10 years ago, China represented 1% of e-commerce, and nowadays they are 42. They have more mobiles than the United States. They contribute with 34% of global companies that are startups, and they generate new technologies. It is 34 and 44%. So in summary, this impact, this so important change has been taking place to the expense of the United States. As you know, since the end of the Second World War, they were the leaders, and this has started to generate a big concern that China is winning the place. But this can happen and could happen in the past. United States overcame Great Britain, and there was not a conflict between UK and the United States. There was a peaceful transition. Great Britain and United States were the ones that created this international model. So the question is, what are the bases? What is the opinion of the parties? How United States thinks about this economic and dramatic growth? There are 4 dimensions of this conflict expressed in what the United States calls the trade deficit, which is so important for the United States. And also the policy that China adopts to investments in their own country and manipulation of intellectual protection. They are not respecting intellectual property rights. Another argument is that they manipulate the exchange rate to make more competitive their exports. And also the topic of technological policies. U.S. argues that China, by means of a series of policies like subsidies from the state, investment excess, low interest rates, low labor cost, and especially losses of those companies by the state, they have become the main producer of a wide range of key manufacturing sectors like steel, glass, aluminum that have overflown international markets. And as the United States, the huge trade deficit that they have. So this is the argument. Getting ahead, this also explains why the United States decided to impose tariffs to steel and aluminum products from China, because they believe that these policies are inadmissible. Here you can see a chart how the trade deficit has grown, that reached almost 400 million US dollars. And I'm going to have a stance here. I don't think that this is a valid argument. The deficit is not only with China, but with a large number of countries, among them Mexico, Germany, Japan, etc. Economists agree that deficits are not related to competence on exports and investments, but the savings policies of the country. And economists of the United States criticize their own country. A fact is that these policies of using subsidies and floating markets are concerning, because they believe that they are unloyal policies. To give you an example, a big part of the success of the post-war success between developing countries and the European Union was related to a variety of subsidies used by European countries to leverage the agricultural sector. That was a key factor to have cohesion, the support of farmers, and the way to obtain this was with subsidies. Each time they had a crisis in production, they gave these subsidies, and this generated a factor of overproduction, and then Europeans sent it to the international market and developing countries.
This is an example, so for you to understand what I mean by Western companies. Well, this depends on forgiving loans to producers or manufacturers, and something that Dr. Connella didn't mention. Part of the creation of welfare is because there's an incentive policy to the manufacturers. So they are more motivated to have more throughput because they are rich enough to manage the cohesion and the domestic economic growth. And sometimes it doesn't matter to use disloyal or support policies. And another important element are those policies towards investments. This is a fact, and this is the argument of the U.S. that his companies in China and most of the Europeans are obliged to establish joint ventures to share innovations and the technological know-how. So in this way, the Chinese companies are empowered and do not comply with the rights of intellectual property that they should comply with. So this is in the agenda, and they are demanding to have a change. Well, this was accepted when China opened, but this is a policy. Let me talk about China. Okay, the rate, the exchange rate. China used the exchange rate to gain competitiveness, but this was modified since 2005. But the U.S. still argues that China is still manipulating the exchange rate. The Treasury Department of the United States in 2018 carried out the model. What they see like the criteria to determine if the exchange rate is being manipulated. So they have to have like gains more than 3% of the GDP, and also a tension in the exchange rate over 2% of the GDP. So there are 4 quarters since 2018. And the first criteria was complied by China, Mexico, Japan, Germany, Italy, among others, with a gain with more than $20 billion. Okay, account current superávit that was complained by Japan, Germany, Taiwan, and Switzerland. But the third one, it was a tension. None of the above mentioned were complying with this. So China was not moving the exchange rate, but Trump in some way is accusing them. So the other main accusation in the technological policy of China in 2015, a strategic plan made in China 2025 was announced, with which China will, through massive subsidy that distort the commercial competition by increasing self-sufficiency in the technology of China. So in 2020, 40% of inputs made in China and 70%, and in 2025, the final production of a series of high value added and strategic industries like the pharmaceutical, car, aerospatial, semiconductors, robotics, and IT. So this has been instrumented through companies and demands of technological transfer by companies and other foreign companies that operate and want to operate in the Chinese market, to whom patents and brands have been stolen. And those new technologies have like a dual use because they can be used for civil and military purposes. And those Chinese progress will be reflected in a greater military power, and this will threat the security of the United States and its affiliates. So if China has success and Made in China 2025, and these industries with an endogenous content, the balance of power will change dramatically, and also the political view internationally. So the government of President Trump has imposed 2 measures to prevent this from happening. So one, the exports of the United States to China, and ask that the Chinese can buy American companies at a 25% of those technologies. So they are imposing, and there's a review on which ones must continue to be invested. So China, its argument is that it follows the guidelines of the Trade Organization. And China says that the proof of this is that it has signed free trade agreements and it's been incorporated to BET G20 without receiving complaints for its behavior. In 2010, he fully complied with the commercial liberalization objectives when it reduced the tariffs in 15.3% to 9.8%. And also, it created a new list of foreign investment to liberalize the revenue. This is what China says. In intellectual property, well, it has made important change to the legal system, and also it is establishing one attack to online piracy. The commercial brands also, they have been working on that. Okay, the defenses of China, it is following the same path that Germany did, and Obama, the former president, followed an advanced manufacturing partnership during his administration. The only thing that changes is the dimension of the resources involved, the discipline of compliance, and the political commitment of leaders and their ability to articulate their relationships between government, universities, and companies. So China is bragging about this. Yes, we have a very important articulation model. It is true that we are investing resources, but we are doing for something that doesn't violate any rule in international economy. And they say, I have the right to invest in the U.S. with no administrative restrictions. So to wrap up, there's two arguments that fight each other. The U.S. arguments, the commerce balance, the oversupply, the subsidies, the low supervision of intellectual property, access to public acquisitions, opening the financial sector, like some Western countries. Also the opening of the car sector, and also China was committed to buy more cars. And they do not want to have a non-discriminatory innovation policy. Why? They just want to do it and taking advantage of the technology. There's no unequal treatment. They do not allow the access to market in the same way the Western countries are allowing it to foreign investment, Chinese investments, and Chinese products. One of the arguments of China is that it complains that not only has complied with the commitments before the Trade Organization, but many Western countries haven't finished to give the status of market economy that they committed to give after a period of time, that is 2017 or 2016. China had the right to give the market economy status. And the argument of the U.S., and while they are keeping in China the non-discriminatory innovation policy, they cannot be treated or given a status of a market economy. Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, one of the chapters, and what we have today, one of the chapters that are really important, that were novel during this administration, the disciplines for state-owned companies. In those chapters, certain rules were established that should be complied, so the Chinese won't violate the rules of World Trade Organization. They cannot use subsidies based on, if they are not based in international or foreign laws. So they say that this status has not been given, and this is part of the problem that they have, because they haven't been acknowledged. The free trade agreements signed with China, according to analysts, and one of the conditions imposed by China to sign them is to be automatically recognized as a market economy. Once they have signed with China, have to accept this like a condition to sign. Also, China is arguing that they should file the exchange rate manipulation, and the technology imports shouldn't be avoided. And also they unblock the Chinese investment in the U.S. And also it should the respect for reforms and the velocity that China wants to impose in the policies, and how this conflict has evolved, how they have made progress. China should reduce the commercial deficit. China showed that that agree on negotiating to open more the Chinese market and to halt the theft of intellectual property. What hasn't been accepted is that to put a brake on the Chinese technological development, to have a mutual respect, balanced solution, and the U.S. should eliminate tariffs to reach a consensus solving the different conflicts. That the U.S. cannot pretend to be the fiscal, judge, jury, and police. And China does not accept that USA put a ceiling on its technological development. With the arrival of President Trump, a bilateral agreement was established. So at the initiation in 2017, the average tariff to products was 3%. With the measures taken by Trump, currently the average is 20%. So China, in order to see the possibility of eliminating this on unilateral tariffs, agreed to sign this trade agreement. It is the first phase. It was signed on the 15th of January 2020 and includes 7 subjects: the rights of intellectual property, transference of technology, the commitments of China to buy food and agriculture products, open more the financial sector, and to have a certain discipline in the management of exchange rate and transparency, and to expand the bilateral trade according to a supervision mechanism that it was going to be established in the agreement. So what are the commitments of China in this first phase agreement? Committed itself to buy products from the U.S. for more than $200 billion and increase the buy of beans, soya beans, pork, and corn. Also, it was committed to increase and ensure the protection of intellectual property rights of the companies of the U.S., but the United States didn't want to lift the tariffs. So for July of this year, the impact of this agreement of the Chinese authorities is that the imports of American products increased 15.1 in June compared to the same month of 2019, while the exports in China also increased 5%. So, as you can see in the commercial, they have reached a truce, and this has to do with the worries of China that they cannot still maintaining the deficit, and it is important to solve the problem, and in some way they reached this agreement. Supposedly, there will be a second agreement in a second phase. In the technological side, I'm running out of time. I'm going to do it faster. In the technological side, the conflict has worsened. As you can know, as you know, since the security law in China, U.S. added China to the list of prohibited places because of the high technology. The doctor Marisela told us, the U.S. has continued putting pressure to its allies not to buy equipment from Huawei for the telecommunication system of 5G high velocity, and also order to the closing of the consulate in China in Houston because the officials were taking actions of espionage. So that's why they cannot buy technology in the U.S. The use of WeChat and TikTok applications are forbidden because a lot of people use them to have an exchange from like Chinese, the community of China, the Americans, and this is how, because of the controls established by the Chinese government to the apps and all the technological companies of the U.S. and other countries, they are obliged to use those apps to communicate. So the U.S. said, you have these controls, you impose controls to my company, so I also will put controls to your countries. This is what the U.S. says. So first they were supposed to be banned, and then there was the possibility that the Oracle company, which is American, along with Walmart, they will create a new company that will call TikTok Global, that will host all the American data and will protect their information systems. The new company will commit to have 25,000 employments and will contribute with $5 billion for the education in the U.S. But there was an amparo that suspended this action when it comes to the TikTok prohibition. WeChat was not included there. So what are the keys of this conflict? Well, the impressive progress of China occurred at the expense of the deterioration of the U.S. So the U.S. must acknowledge that it is on the descendant part of the curve. So China is challenging the U.S., and China talks about that it's trying to reach the dream, and one of the Chinese dreams is a return to the historical normal. What does that mean? That it's reconquering the central part that the country always had. This is an analysis of an investigator that the 1821 century, the GDP of China always overcome any GDP of any Western country. So the U.S. also is, it's the American Great Again, is the destiny manifesto of the 19th century, that now they can unilaterally establish or recover their hegemony by using its political and economical power. So U.S. cannot deny that even though it maintains its hegemony, but we need to acknowledge that the U.S. is still important in the soft power, the culture, and the media presence. U.S. is the main exporter of cultural products worldwide. English is the language that is spoken in all businesses worldwide. So this is very difficult to be overcome soon. So another key is we have to avoid what we call the trap of Thucydides. What is the trap of Thucydides? He was a Greek historian, and he participated in the Peloponnese War, and he wrote a book which is the father of the history, where he demonstrated that the war, the Athens and Sparta, happened because of misinterpretation of Sparta, that the Athens wanted to take the hegemony from them and decided to confront it. So the trap, when there's an attempt of displacing one power or between two powers, we need to overcome by understanding the roots of the conflict. For example, the U.S. now, according to some analysts, say that it's trying to use a confrontation policy very similar to the one that it was applied to the Soviet Union. But this does not apply to China. Why? Because China, the URSS never exceeded the 40% of the GDP of the U.S. China is the first exporter and the first vendor or creditor. He learned from the URSS, and URSS decided to confront it militarily wise and was defeated. China is focused on the economic development and the creation of partnerships. So what is another important factor in this conflict? It is a conflict that will be with us in the next 20 years at least, and we need to acknowledge that the conflict, as Dr. Marisela suggested, it is not only Trump. As I said, in the Obama administration, there was already a decision to confront, to displace, to find options for this model with a TPP, but Trump decided to withdraw. So Trump, in some way, make this topic horizontal. It's very probable that, according to Biden, that it will continue confronting China, and he won't allow that China will not own its technology. So these two candidates agree on something, that China wants to be the king of technology. So they think that they do not know China. From 1990 and 2020 has been the 30 best years of the Chinese civilization. And China, for example, has in its flesh the century of humiliation. What was this humiliation? As you all know, is the Opium War, the inventions, the possession, all the European powers that overthrown. And she explained it like abandoning the idea of becoming industrial. So this left them very vulnerable. And for them, the social harmony is more important than freedom and individual rights. As Dr. Marisela said, the U.S., and I think that in this conflict, wanted to have gains in a short run, but the U.S. in the short run and China in the short run. In the long run, China says the idea is to defeat the opponent with no combat. So the crisis of 2018 and 2019 not only damaged the U.S. but also to China. It generated an excessive enthusiasm because of the strengthening of China and the weakening of U.S. So that's why they created AEIIB. With all due respect, those acronyms, they say that those acronyms belong to other countries, but China decided that they belong to it, and they see it like potential military bases. And that is why the U.S. sent ships and to the Strait to warn them that it won't be it won't allow that they will take the control. So the symmetry between companies and the governments. The dilemma is that the U.S. has to think of its 330 million of inhabitants. It cannot be the lonely rider. He has to recover its allies and to acknowledge that China is a rival. So let me summarize. Okay, what are the implications for Latin America? They are obliging us to a situation of drastic fall in exports due to COVID, and also important deviations in trade that have benefited some countries in Latin America because of the loss of the U.S. when China established tariffs in soy products, and the benefited country was Brazil and other countries of Latin America. So some countries are benefited at the end of the day, but all of us are not benefited when having a trade based on rules like the one imposed by WTO and the one that has been imposed by the U.S. Hollywood-like. So,
and this is called war in the region, dividing countries. Ecuador with other countries that are stressed by the United States to have investments to the extent China accepts. So this Pacific Alliance, a very important integration process, how can it be linked to Asia and the Pacific based on China, a model of China? So we have a problem here. We need to privilege plural dialogue with China, looking for a way for Mercosur to define important projects, trying to propose a modern program for the WTO. We are not clear about the results. What's clear is that the way they are rivals, U.S. and China, they depend on each other. United States is the biggest importer from China. So even when they are competitors, they are codependent. And if they harm the rival, that would be a problem for them. What they should look for? Modernization reform from the WTO and an initiative for cooperation, fighting terrorism, internet governance, because with the policies that they are establishing right now, we're going to create a balkanization of internet unless they come to an agreement to share markets based on international rules, implying advantages for both and not seeing each other as a rival. So this is what I wanted, and if there's a question, it will be a pleasure for me to answer them. Thank you very much. There are some questions, but due to logistics, please write them through the chat, and we will send them by means of the email. But I would like to request Moises Solares. Please, could you hand out the participation diploma, please? Moises Solares, please. Thank you very much. I thank you for the participation. Very interesting. So, Moises Solares, please. Okay. It is an honor for me to hand out this recognition. UC&CS America grants this diploma to Dr. Gustavo Vega Cánovas for his participation in this conference with the topic, the hegemonic conflict between the United States, China, and implications for Latin America, on October the 12th, 2020. Thank you very much. Mauricio Mubarak Gonzalez signs this diploma. It has been an honor to have your experience. Thank you very much. A pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. Bye.